Galileo Galilei was born on February 15, 1564. Born in Italy, Galileo was a mathematician and a scientist. He's well known for his mathematical achievements and scientific discoveries and is also known as the father of modern science. In 1583, Galileo went to the University of Pisa and originally planned on studying medicine as it was what his father wanted him to do. He soon got bored with that and looked for something new. After a while, he became interested in mathematics and science and devoted his life to that instead. He didn't get a degree as he couldn't afford it. Eventually, though, after several smaller teaching and tutoring jobs, he became a mathematics professor at the University of Pisa in 1589. Unfortunately, some of his views were different than his fellow professors, and he was forced to leave the University of Pisa and get a new job, this time at the University of Padua. He continued to try to spread his ideas there and drew crowds with his fascinating evidence and research. Around this time, he invents the early thermometer, which was then called a thermoscope. Admittedly, it was not entirely reliable. He invents an improved telescope despite the fact that he had never seen the original, and recreated and improved it using only a description of the original. One of the experiments Galileo did focused on pendulums. His idea was to take two pendulums of the same length and swing them from different starting heights and see if it would take the same amount of time to come to a complete stop or take different amounts of time. He tested it, and by comparing it with his heartbeat, he concluded that it took the same amount of time for each to come to a complete stop. A thought experiment he did aimed to test if two objects that weighed different amounts but were the same size would take the same amount of time to fall from the same height. His conclusion was that, theoretically, they would take the same amount of time to fall. During his lifetime, Galileo experimented a lot. Because of this, a bunch of new mathematical and physical equations were subsequently discovered. One example of these equations would be d equals 1 over 2gt squared, which measures the distance d traveled by an object falling for t amount of time. Another example is v subscript a equals 1 over 2gt, which is the average velocity, v subscript a, of an object that has been falling for t amount of time. In both examples, g represents gravity. These both are just a few of the many equations that Galileo discovered. He also discovered and named 4 of Jupiter's moons, as well as observing the sun and sunspots. He also contributed to the research of Venus and aided in the discovery of Venus's phases. Galileo was supportive of the Copernican theory, or heliocentric theory, which was that the sun was the center of the universe. The Catholic Church thought that the Earth was the center of the universe and thought that everything revolved around it. Because of their differing views and Galileo's constant expression of his belief, he was tried by the Church for heresy and was put under house arrest for the last 9 years of his life. However, he continued to write his books, and even though he wasn't allowed to publish any of them, he manages to sneak one by and publishes it. It was his last book published before his death on January 8, 1642. We continue to honor his achievements in everyday life by naming things after him and using his equations to help further our research on the world.